Occurred to me that Reverend Lisa and I have been doing these readings since the beginning of the pandemic. In fact, that's why we started because, as you know, almost everybody knows, everything went virtual for quite a while. Some meetings were great online and others were really awkward. I remember some of the Woodlands Chamber business meetings online were just kind of okay. It didn't fit the situation. They were real awkward, but teaching classes, that kind of worked. But then again, I've been involved through practitioner training and through ministerial training with a lot of online stuff anyway. So it kind of works out pretty well. Today's reading is about, well, it's about a bunch of things. One of them is creativity. The title actually is Stretching Through Creativity. The first quote is from Matthew Fox, and he was a New Thought luminary in the 20th century. He lived for a good part of the 20th century. I think he was a divine science minister. At first, I thought he was unity, but I actually think he was divine science, which was it's still around, but it was kind of a predecessor to science of mind because Ernest Holmes, our founder, was at one stage a divine science minister. And Matthew Fox, he's written a lot of stuff. He's written some really small pamphlets, which are really good. And like me, he was born across the ocean. He was actually born in Ireland, grew up and spent most of his young adulthood in London. I spent mine in the north of England, but we had a very similar kind of education, although I came along, I don't know, 40 or 50 years after him. But anyway, a little bit about Matthew Fox. He's worth looking up, actually. Matthew, and I'll spell that Fox, just like the animal. Fear produces courage, which in fact happens in the midst of fear. Despair produces hope, which is born out of the depths of despair. And vulnerability produces creativity, which requires a capacity to get hurt. A little bit, Rev Kelly impacts this a little bit, so I'm not going to comment on that right now. Ernest Holmes says, remember that the power in you is you. It is itself as you. The more you live, the more completely it is expressed through you. In other words, you're expressing the divine, God, the all. And often science of mind and other new thought or very similar teachings are accused of people claiming, I am God. Well, because it's actually said, but it doesn't mean to say that I am the ground of all being. It means I'm an expression of that ground of all being. It doesn't mean to say I'm the whole thing. That's infinite. It just simply means when I say you are God, it means that you are God in expression. You are not the sum totality of God. So anyway, just thought I would mention that. Anyway, Ernest Holmes' quote was from This Thing Called You on page 83. And Matthew Fox's quote was from something called Original Blessing. Original Blessing. This is Reverend Kelly, who says, creating is itself the birthing of God. He says, I'm unsure where I heard that statement, but I find it beautiful. How many of us see ourselves as creators or artists? Funnily enough, earlier this afternoon, my wife went to Lone Star College, our local community college, for a 45-minute, 1 hour lecture on creativity. So it's kind of ironic. Reverend Kelly goes on to say, each day we awaken to a blank canvas, ready to add the brush strokes of our day. Whatever colors we use and whatever medium we choose, there is no right way and there is no wrong way to express. From the clothes we wear to how loving or generous we choose to be, our presence is an act of creation. It is empowering and essential that we recognize ourselves as a creative force in the universe. The divine is expressing as us through us. So that really explains the God thing, right? Allowing yourself to be vulnerable moves you into a space where, yes, you might get hurt. A little bit more about that shortly. It can be scary. At the same time, when you're vulnerable, you open yourself to connect, feel, and authentically be yourself. Others are drawn to this vulnerable, authentic you. Why? Because their hearts yearn for it as well. We stretch ourselves on our human canvas by daring to be ourselves. We become more powerful when we are vulnerable enough and creative enough to be authentic and to live in this place of being unabashedly ourselves. The more we live this way, the more connected to God we are. The more we stretch to embrace the creative expression of God that we are, the more possibilities open for us to live lives of love, generosity, and beauty. The bottom line is we're all creative. I know people come along and say, well, I couldn't paint or sculpt like any of the great masters like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo, or I couldn't write plays like William Shakespeare. Assuming Shakespeare wrote them, there's a lot of controversy about that. Or I couldn't have written an epic like Gilgamesh, or I couldn't have written this huge tale of, you know, the Roman Aeneas or the Homer's Iliad. But the bottom line is we're all creative in our own different ways. We just have to look for that creativity because we are. We all are creating all the time. And it's when we start to use whatever works for us. Every single person is creative. I was looking on the television on Sunday, on CBS Sunday Morning, and they were talking about kids and later on people, obviously, who had either learning disabilities or they were they were handicapped in some way, shape, or form, usually mentally, but sometimes physically. Sometimes they were nonverbal, but they all had this creativity in them. One kid who wasn't really totally verbal had got this wonderful, you know, abstract art. And the experts, I guess, were really admiring it. So every single one of us has been creative. Let's face it, sometimes when you're deciding, what shall I have to eat? And then you come up with whatever you're going to have for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Our breakfast is easy, it's always a smoothie. But occasionally we're creative with it. But the bottom line is, you are being creative when you decide what to have for lunch, even if it's a sandwich. You are being creative in that moment because you produced something out of the ether, as it were. But the point that really she's making here is that when you're vulnerable, you start to grow. But a word of caution here. Most of us are not sufficiently spiritually mature to be vulnerable in any situation. Because if you get in and become vulnerable in the wrong crowd, you can get hurt. So you do have to be careful with your vulnerability until you reach that enlightenment stage where I guess it's kind of irrelevant then. But most of us do have to be careful. And I was just thinking about it. My wife talks to everybody. She's talked to a whole bunch of people in one of the big box stores that we just came back from today. And I was thinking, back on it from here now. She really is being vulnerable when she goes and starts talking to these people, like the ladies and the men who dish out the food. You've been to Sam's, Costco, and others, and at certain times of the day, they got all these food samples out there. If you're hungry, it's a good time to go. And different people she talks to. There was one guy there. He was a big African American guy, and he said, "How tall are you?" And she thought he said 8 feet. Well, he wasn't. And she said, "Oh, 8 feet," and he said, "Come down a foot." But the point was, she opened herself up to be vulnerable to make mistakes, and she was talking to a whole bunch of people there today. So, but she is vulnerable when she does that, and it helps her to grow as a person. I'm not quite that brave, just walking up to complete strangers and starting a conversation. I guess I can do it sometimes. By and large, can't do that, but she can. So that's one way of being vulnerable. So What is your way of being vulnerable? What opportunities do you see for being vulnerable and opening up and saying, well, this really is me? You know, I know you may see me in this way, but this is me. Sometimes when I get on these readings, I'm not sure what I'm going to say. When I get up and give a talk at Creative Life Spiritual Center, I prepared it, but I've got to be open to spirit working through me to just let things go. And sometimes, if we make mistakes, like Reverend Jesse's often said, people said, oh, I really enjoy what you said there. And they told him, and he never said that. But the point is, he was being open and vulnerable about himself. And he was this weekend about his growing up years. So vulnerability helps us to grow. But unless we're enlightened, I would say, be careful. In the wrong situations and with the wrong people, it's not the right thing to do. The affirmation, my life is art. How about that? I honor and recognize myself as a creator. My life is art. I honor and recognize myself as a creator. So that's all I got time for because I've got to eat a late lunch and dash off to a business meeting. But yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to do these readings. Why? Because it keeps me on track for learning all the time. So it's always good. And I do appreciate feedback. And for goodness sake, if you don't agree with something I say, tell me, but tell me why. Because I don't always agree with the writers, as many of you know. Should I? It's my point of view. They got their point of view. You have your point of view. It's cold around here. It's cold for these parts. So please take care of yourself. If you've got pets, make sure that they're indoors. We have outdoor pets that come around here. We provide shelters for them. So take care of yourself, take care of other people, take care of pets. And until next time, guess what? Namaste.